Hi everyone! Today we're setting up the March bullet journal layout together. We have the first spring theme of the year and I wanted to paint some flowers I haven't used before in my themes. So we have this lilac, lavender and wisteria inspired theme which I am so excited to show you. As always, we're starting from the cover spread and I'm continuing with the monthly calendar and cover spread combination. Doing them together is one of those things that saves me some time since I don't have as much time to set up my journals as I used to. And today we are mainly painting directly onto the bullet journal with watercolors. So I prepared my watercolor palette and some brushes. However, I did want to draw just a few pencil guidelines here on the cover spread, which we're gonna go through pretty fast. On this spread, the style of the flowers and leaves will be quite loose, so I didn't even try to make the sketches super defined or anything. The main thing I wanted to sketch here were the placements of the bigger flowers so that they would end up somewhat evenly onto the page and that I remember to not paint leaves on those areas. But then it's time to take out the watercolors and I'll show you here the colors we're gonna use for the leaves and the main color I used for the flowers. It's always a little bit difficult to fit the watercolor palette to the screen while trying to film at a close distance, but luckily today we'll only use these few colors for the whole painting. I started with these very light and quick leaves that will just be in the background in the final image. So I left a lot of water in my brush, only tapped into the color and then painted these translucent leaves here and there. You'll see how these just help to fill the space, add some dimension and color variation in the final image, and they really don't need to be anything special since the main focus in the picture will be on the other details. I wanted to switch up the sizes and styles of the leaves slightly, so some of them are bigger and rounder, and then I painted a few of these small, skinny, hanging style leaves as well. I encourage you to play with colors and different intensities here, but once you've reached the amount of leaves you want, we can start to darken things up. I tried to be a little bit more precise with these next few leaves, so I switched to a smaller watercolor brush and then started to paint these darker leaves. What I like about this brush is that it has a pretty pointy tip, which helps to make these sharp corners to your leaves, if that makes any sense. So this time I also changed the color slightly. I used a little bit more of the sap green on some leaves and then mixed a lot more of the gray blue on the others. You can also add a drop of darker color to a part of the leaf to create some shadows or variation. I also left these white slivers on some of the bigger leaves especially because, I don't know, I just liked how it looked. We'll add a lot more leaves to this painting later, but for now, I thought we could jump to the flowers because I didn't want to cover the areas meant for the flowers with the leaves. I started with the biggest one here at the front so that you can really see how you can paint these wisteria flowers yourself. They're honestly one of the easiest flowers to paint in my opinion, and they still look great, so I highly recommend you to give these a go. They really are much easier to paint than they look. So the first step is to add this lighter or brighter lilac color, and I used these pretty random tapping motions and made the overall shape thinner towards the bottom part. You can add a few plops outside of the main shape to add a few flyaway petals, and then when the main shape is done, the second step is to pick a darker color and just kind of go over some parts of the flowers. I focused the darker color on the top parts of these petals and kind of towards the upper left side of all the flowers. However, it's not that specific, honestly. You can pretty much just tap the dark color wherever and it will still work, which is exactly why these flowers are so fun and easy to paint. If you just want to practice the main shape and keep things simple, you can get away with just using one color for all the flowers, but if you're a little bit more adventurous, you can also try to mix some different shades of lilac and paint some of the flowers with those different shades. So I added this more cherry red shade to some of the other flowers that gave them a bit more of a reddish hue, and then I added the same grayish blue color to some of the other flowers, especially to the shadow parts. You can also try to keep some of the flowers lighter in general, which will also create nice variation. So we are once again really putting this Mellow Days watercolor bullet journal to the test here, and we're using these colors that I use quite rarely for some reason. I don't even know why. I think these colors pair really beautifully with light greens, and while searching for inspiration for this theme, I realized that there are also quite a few flowers that match these colors. But anyway, then I just kept adding more leaves and flowers here and there. My goal was to pretty much cover this whole upper part, and I think I could have made the flowers even bigger, so that was my one regret here, but instead I just added more leaves and I think it still looks pretty nice in the end. As the last step, I also added this very loose branch between the flowers and then added a few color dots around the spread. In the end, I think this was the fastest cover spread painting I've done in a long time, and I think it still looks very nice. So after the painting part was done, I started to create the calendar, and I used this light green for it that I printed on a white sticker paper. As always, I'll add these colors to the free section of my shop. I have a bunch of color palettes, some textures, scrapbooking stuff, and so on. So if you like to print these types of decorations for yourself, you'll find the link in the video description. I always think these simple colored papers add such nice details to the pages and really fill the white space with color. But anyway, after this very simple calendar was done, I went ahead and finished this spread with the big March title. I used a 03 Pigma Micron pen to write this and created this fake calligraphy effect by adding more thickness to the downstrokes of the letters. I'll add the name of the font that I used as my main inspiration for the titles this month, but some of them are also just written freehand. Eventually, this is maybe more minimal than some of my other cover spreads, but I was still quite pleased with the end result. And as I mentioned, it took me like a fraction of time than some of the recent cover spreads have taken. I guess that's the beauty of working with watercolors. They really are the fastest method to create any decorations for your journal, in my opinion. But anyway, now it's time to move on, and next we have this super fun Dutch door section that I'm gonna use for the monthly planning and monthly reflection. We're gonna start by cutting this sliver out of the second page, and I left this rectangular extra piece in the middle. That will just be an additional decoration piece here. This whole Dutch door style was really inspired by this beautiful spread by Thea from Thea and Bujo that I saw online. So this is the main idea for the page shape. And now let's start to paint the main decorations here on the left side. So next we're gonna paint this repeating lavender pattern that will give a pretty spring look to this spread. I sketched out the main shapes a little bit with a pencil beforehand, but I still managed to make some mistakes in the pattern. However, I don't think it's that noticeable, so no need to feel too pressured about keeping things identical. I used a smaller brush here to help with these delicate small shapes, and I started by painting all the leaves of one pattern repeat and then followed with the lavender flowers. I'm so sorry that the footage skips me painting the first few flowers. My camera just randomly stopped recording and I didn't realize until after painting for a while. But anyway, I used all the same colors as on the cover spread painting. And again, tried to add some slight variation to both the green and lilac tones. When it comes to the lavender shapes, I think they are very similar to paint as the wisteria flowers. So all you need to do is add these dot groups with small tapping motions. And if you want, you can again play with the color intensity and maybe add some darker shadow dots to certain parts of the flowers. I tried to make the final pattern somewhat balanced, but the whole space still looked a little bit too empty for my liking. So lastly, I added a few dots between the flowers to fill up the space a little bit more. But now that we're done with the bigger side decoration, let's start filling the rest of the spread. I started by adding these light green stripes to the Dutch door edge and decided to use the vertical space here to write a small title for these pages. I also added 4 colorful boxes to the right side that we are later going to use for the March habit trackers, and I liked how they added some color here to the whole section. I know it probably doesn't make any sense, but I somehow felt like the second spread looked more like the main page here. So I made this the planning side, and then the page inside is the reflection side. Feel free to change that up. I was just going with my own vibes at the moment. But anyway, when it comes to the content here, I started with a simple focus section that will pretty much cover the whole left side. This is where I write about my priorities for the month ahead and try to eliminate things to only the most important ones, especially now that we have a new baby cat in the family who requires attention and playtime. I feel like the time I have for working is much more limited than before, when I had basically no restrictions for the amount or time of the day when I could get work done. So I feel like having a plan and a very clear idea of what needs to get done and when is more necessary for me than it's been in a long time. The rest of the spread is also pretty simple, so here at the top of the right page I wrote "This month I will," which I'll frame as 4 promises for myself. I did this last month and I thought it was a good way of wording your monthly goals or tasks. It makes it easy to judge whether you kept those promises or not. And then lastly, I have this small space to write a short weekly plan for each week. I used this green colorful paper as the background for the box, and I think I left the sides a little bit too thick for this one. It didn't really look like how I imagined it in my head, but I'm sure it will still do the job. And then lastly, we're gonna fill the 4 boxes here on the right side, so I'll be tracking just these 4 habits in March. The upcoming month will be a shop launch month for me, which can usually get pretty crazy, so I don't know how much I'll be able to keep up with my habits realistically, but of course that's always the ideal. Now, we could absolutely leave the spread like this. It's what I would usually do, but I did want to add a few stickers to fill some of the empty space. So I have these very fitting stickers by Ikigai Papir, which is the shop run by Hedda from Mochi Bujo here on YouTube. I have a bunch of her beautiful stickers that I usually use in my reading journal, but I've mentioned a few times that I'd like to include maybe a little bit more stickers or washi tapes into my bullet journal setups, and I just want to say that the main focus will always be on creating decorations ourselves, but I do wish I sometimes had the opportunity to showcase stickers, especially from other creators and from my own shop, or even from bigger shops that have graciously sent their stuff from me for free. So here all the stickers are from Hedda, and these 2 very neutral washi tapes are from my own shop, and I think they just added such a cute finishing touch to this spread. Again, not necessary by any means, but a nice touch anyway. But now let's move on. So we are next flipping ourselves to the other side of the Dutch door, and here I started to set up the monthly reflection spread. I started with these 2 sections here that I titled "On My Mind" and "The Spring Launch." I used similar shaped boxes here with the lilac colored paper this time, and the first question will just be a free space to write about whatever I've been thinking or feeling recently, and the spring launch box will be for me to review how my shop launch went, if I did enough preparation, or about things I need to consider moving forward. I know this is definitely not very useful for you guys, but you could, for example, replace this section with a gratitude log, maybe best memories of the month or something like that. Then on the next page, I started with this graph, which I'll use to rate the whole month of March from 1 to 10 on these specific categories. I think it gives a pretty good overview of the month and makes you realize how some of these categories don't necessarily align with each other. And then the last thing on the reflection side is this favorites section that I love to include every once in a while. This is pretty self-explanatory, and after writing these few sections here, I finished this side with the same stickers again to tie everything together. So that finishes the whole planning reflection section, and I must say that I really like how this ended up. It's one of those spreads that I'm really excited to see after the pen, because there's already quite a lot going on, and I think it will just look really pretty at the end. Anyway, we still have the weekly section to go through, and I wanted us to walk through a final flower painting for this theme. And I wanted to do something a little bit different. So all the flowers we've painted this far were quite loose and quick. So I wanted to draw this one bigger lavender that is more detailed and defined. So the same flower, but with a very different style. I'll show you some parts of the pencil sketching, which is how I started this drawing as always. And this time I really tried to define these individual petal shapes and add much more structure to the flower. It will be really helpful to have some reference pictures you can use for guidance, but in general, even if your petals are not exactly correct compared to real lavenders, it won't really matter and the end result will most likely still work. But anyway, after the pencil sketch, I went over the outlines with this very thin 005 micron pen that helped to clean things up and separate the shapes even more. One thing I must say about this notebook paper compared to a regular bullet journal is that my thin pens and sometimes even the thicker ones don't work quite as well on it, since the paper has this light watercolor paper texture, so it's maybe not as smooth. It's nothing that bothers me too much, but something I wanted to still mention. I also feel like my pens run out or just become unusable a little bit faster. But anyway, I erased most of the pencil sketches here, and then the next step is to start coloring the petals. I'd encourage you to keep the first layers, at least some of the petals, quite light. We can always darken things up later, but if you color the whole flower too dark in the beginning, it will make adding the shadows more difficult. I think I could have done a better job at this too, and maybe just create a super light color layer first to the whole area and then start adding the shadows with a completely new layer. Now I was mixing some lighter and darker shades here from the beginning, which makes things faster but also a bit less pretty. But anyway, I focused most of the shadows on the inner folds of the flowers and also a little bit more to the left side again. The shadowing is a great way to outline certain lighter petals from the rest, which will create more definition to the individual shapes. I also painted these green leaves, which was trickier than it should have been for some reason. And then lastly, I took a little bit thicker black pen and used this to create thicker outlines on the petals, especially to the ones in the shadows and on the bottom side of them, creating again a little bit more contrast between the light and shadow sides. I think adding these final outlines made a huge improvement here and really helped to clean up the shapes even further. So that's it for this very different style lavender drawing. I hope you'll find a style from this video that you want to try out. I would say that this is definitely the most difficult one, as you can probably imagine, but I still find it super fun and interesting to try something like this out every once in a while. But now I just finished this simple weekly section, so after writing this bigger week's title, I cut out a similar Dutch door shape as we did on the previous page. So this way the bigger flower is visible on both of these pages and there will still be enough room for me to have 2 weeks on one spread. I had to fix these green areas a little bit with scissors because the shapes didn't really line up. But then all we have left is to write the weekday titles. I decided to continue with the cursive titles again, and I will use these few rows to write a short daily to-do list. For me, the bullet journal is mainly for work tasks and any appointments I need to remember. So for example, house chores are something I don't usually write down here. And again, I used these Ikigai Papir number stickers for the dates, which is something I do often on the weekly pages I set up out of camera. I really like to use some weekday titles and number stickers because it makes everything look really polished and also speeds up the whole setup process. Then I used the right edge here for any random notes I might want to write down throughout the month. And after adding these light lilac lines, it finishes up this springy March layout. I really hope you enjoyed following along and that you got some new ideas or inspiration from this. And if you're wondering if this is the spring theme for my new shop launch, that will actually be the April theme, which is closer to the launch date, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having an amazing day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye bye!